Right, should you train heavy all the time? Now, training heavy progressively over time is obviously a good way of progressive overload for building muscle. Obviously, it builds strength as well, and it brings in resilience in structures like tendons and joints and things like that. And as a physio, I obviously advocate this, this approach, obviously in certain circumstances. But if you're training to build muscle, obviously training heavy isn't the only way of obviously getting bigger muscle. Obviously, we know that training in close proximity to failure, whether you have lighter loads or heavier loads, obviously has an equal muscle building effect. And you can use this to your advantage because obviously training heavy has a lot more demand on joint, on cartilage, on tendon, on all of them other structures. Now, obviously, I know that we periodize and we obviously have deloads planned in and things like that. The dilemma is that deloading is good and useful, and it obviously does allow to reset some of these structures. But you've got to remember, some of these structures take longer than a week to repair if they've gone too far over a cumulative period of time, especially with the heavier loads. So sometimes you might need to actually have periods of time where you give your body longer. Now, obviously people would say, well, you don't want to deload for longer because you're going to start losing some of the gains that you've made, and that's obviously very true. However, because with building muscle you can train with lighter load, then I always advocate a switch really. So you could perhaps do a few mesocycles, training blocks, heavy, then you could drop right into some light work. Again, training to failure, you could utilize the myo reps kind of philosophy or just do straight set work. But again, you've got to go really close to failure on this, and a lot of people don't really actually go anywhere near failure. So I think that's another thing that you've got to be careful of with the high rep work. High load work's all right, you see, because you just sort of very quickly hit your limit and you can't move it. There's no real lactate, there's no real burn. It's not an issue for that. Trouble with the lighter load stuff, to get to failure is really hard. You really get the burn. It's cardiovascularly, it's more taxing, so it's harder to truly hit that failure or close to failure point. So obviously that's one thing you've got to be cautious of when you do a lighter block, is you've got to make sure that you truly are getting close to it. So if you were to switch from the heavy stuff, so you're taking a beating with the heavy stuff, but you're stimulating obviously a lot of muscle growth, a lot of strength base, and obviously tendons and so on are getting stronger, but obviously they are cumulatively being broken down in that process as well. The key here is that you can then have your 2 training cycles, say with heavy, deload for a week, come back in with the lighter load work for another 2 training cycles, which could actually be somewhere in the region of 3 months period of time. Now, for me myself, I was getting a joint issue in my elbow just inside here, and it just wouldn't really get any better. I wasn't irritating it with anything, but it just wasn't seeming to go away. And this was obviously training, as I do with high volume, 6 sessions a week, high frequency, and yeah, still not improving, but I was definitely not irritating it once I realized there was a problem. So I then moved into a phase where I went into some myo rep work, some high repetition, lower load work, and we're talking in the first set, say like 35 repetitions, say. And obviously therefore the load is quite light, not as light as like what Professor Brad Schoenfeld's found on some of the studies. I think it was like a 20% of a 1 rep max did see muscle growth, but less than 40% of a 1 rep max and above. So obviously, if you think about it, if you're deadlifting 100 kilograms as an example, well, 20% is a 20 kilogram deadlift. It's obviously ridiculously light. How many repetitions you'd have to go to there would be crazy amounts to actually get close to failure. So it kind of doesn't even make sense to do that low of a load. So obviously I was probably doing slightly more than double the rep numbers that I perhaps would usually do with a heavier load. So I did that for a couple of months, and I didn't really think about me elbow at the time. And I kind of suddenly realized one day my elbow doesn't hurt anymore. So I then got back into the heavier stuff, and I've been doing that for a little bit now. No pain is gone. So it allowed the joint, because I had an ultrasound scan on it, and it showed there was a bit of inflammation in the joint, but no tendon injuries, no joint injuries, no muscle injuries, just overload to the joint itself, creating synovitis in the joint. So obviously it was just cumulatively being irritated, not enough to be really bad, but enough to not go away, and over a longer period maybe would get worse. So obviously that lighter block, I gained probably a bit more muscle growth potentially. I certainly lost nothing. I reckon in the first week I may have noticed some changes, but I definitely lost nothing in doing that, and that research supports that too. So I still trained and I got effective training with lighter load, but my tendons, my joints, my passive structures that are slower to heal and repair and recover than muscle is, were able to recover. And I came back into the heavies again with a resensitization element there as well, and it was gone. So I advocate this as a very good approach. So the best way to do it, I would say, is do heavies for a couple of training cycles, deloading obviously in between on them too, then going into light, jump straight into light, and your body obviously then gets a real rest on them other structures for maybe a cycle or two. Then obviously with your deloads in there too, then rather than jump back to heavy, go more intermediate weight, because you don't want to go from light having acclimatized to only that jumping into heavy. So go into moderate load and then into heavier load beyond that, and then recycle it. And each time your body's getting a new training stimulus, it's different. Your body's getting a resensitization effect, and you're also cycling the loads on tendons and joints and all the rest of it. So you're not constantly driving heavy load at it all the time. And this is definitely the way I think is the way we should go forwards. You've got to look at longevity. And if you're driving high loads all the time and your main mechanism of progressive overload is load, then you're going to have a problem. And I think this is the way around that problem. So like I say, it's going to be a lengthy process to test out, but give it a try. I mean, as a physio, it makes a lot of sense. Personally, I found it to be very useful. We know obviously lighter loads up to close to failure still has the same muscle building effect. So if you're looking to build muscle, switch it around a little bit and then see how you go with that, and let me know. We want to keep making great content for our subscribers, so if anyone would like to support the channel by making a pledge, then we would be extremely grateful, and you can do this on our Patreon page here.